What's going on, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, I wanted to do another one of those big Jurassic Park canon and lore dump videos because I've been making content for like 7 years, and over those years, I've done a whole bunch of videos on dinosaurs and dinosaur science in terms of paleontology, as well as how different the animals look in the Jurassic Park movies. And since you guys liked all that other stuff so much, I figured, you know what? Let me just go ahead and give all of the dinosaur stuff to you in a massive style video. So with that being said, here are a bunch of dinosaur and paleontology videos super cut together for the Jurassic Park franchise, and they start all the way back in 2017.
We've all heard the statement that the Velociraptors in the Jurassic Park series are extremely inaccurate to their true selves, and usually once this declaration is made, the individual bringing the topic forward expresses a strong disliking to how the raptors are portrayed in the franchise as a whole. In both the novels and films of this property, as well as the comic books and video games, the Jurassic Park raptors are always portrayed as 5 to 6 foot scaly dinosaurs, with sickle-shaped claws in their feet as well as a skull and body type reminiscent of a specific creature in the fossil record known as Deinonychus. In the fossil record, there exists an animal known as Velociraptor mongoliensis, which was a small theropod predator covered in feathers that usually weighed in at around 30 pounds and was generally the size of a turkey. This dinosaur is the animal that many detractors of the Jurassic Park films cite as being the real-life version of the stylized Hollywood Velociraptors of Jurassic Park, and the differences of these creatures is pointed out most of the time to make an argument on how unscientific and fictionalized the film's prehistoric life is. If we go back to the origins of the franchise, however, we will find that Crichton's research and designing of these particular animals was done with extensive knowledge of John Ostrom's work on the Deinonychus. Now, John Ostrom is a paleontologist whose work on this particular creature revolutionized the scientific community's thinking on dinosaurs, with the debate of warm-blooded possibilities being a topic of discussion despite the standard cold-blooded reptilian nature of the beast being a common theory beforehand. Crichton met with Ostrom several times while writing Jurassic Park and researched this animal diligently with a paleontologist when designing his antagonizing raptors for the novel. Ostrom himself is noted with saying that the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park are based on Deinonychus in almost every detail, with only the name being changed. When it came time to adapt Crichton's book to the big screen, Spielberg was originally going to use the name Deinonychus, before again going with the name Velociraptor for the same reasons, specifically because the name sounded more dramatic. Despite this difference, the filmmakers went out of their way to obtain all of Ostrom's published work on Deinonychus for use during production, and the resulting film gave the raptors on screen the proportions and size, as well as the skull and snout shape of the Deinonychus. This is usually where the conversation ends when the Jurassic Park raptors are compared with actual dinosaurs from paleontology in the real world, and the conversation never seems to make it past this point of conjecture. Interestingly enough, that's not the entire story, or the whole truth for that matter. Velociraptor Antirrhopus, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, is a different animal than that of Velociraptor mongoliensis. Despite both creatures being of the same raptor family in a sense, Velociraptor Antirrhopus is more commonly known as Deinonychus Antirrhopus. And the reason I bring this particular classification up is because it's actually addressed in Michael Crichton's original novel. Although nowadays Deinonychus is more directly referenced with that name instead of Velociraptor, there was a time in the late 1980s, which is when the novel was being made, that the dinosaur was referred to as Velociraptor. Despite the long-running talking point of the Jurassic Park raptors being unscientific, if one goes back to Crichton's first novel, every issue and question on the Velociraptor's physical traits is brought forward in dialogue used by the protagonists of the book. When Alan Grant and the others are touring Jurassic Park's nursery, the conversation on raptors is brought forward specifically, with Grant's acknowledgement that the park had bred these dinosaurs that the Doctor had just recently excavated. And Dr. Wu's referral to the creature is addressed as Velociraptor mongoliensis to be exact. Alan asks how exactly Wu knows whether or not the dinosaurs are developing correctly, after stating that no one has ever seen these animals before. Wu smiles and gives a response that he's often thought about that, and finds the work to be a bit of a paradox, and was hoping paleontologists such as Grant would be so kind as to compare the animals to the fossil record in order to verify their developmental sequences. Dr. Sattler ponders why exactly Wu called the velociraptor they recently saw a mongoliensis, and is given the response that the name was given because of where they found the amber that created the dinosaurs, and that it originated in China. Alan finds this interesting, and reveals that he had just unearthed a juvenile Velociraptor Antirrhopus before coming coming to Jurassic Park. After this discussion is held and while the group makes their way to the full-grown raptors, Dr. Grant asks Tim what the boy knows about Velociraptor. Tim gives his response that the animal was a small pack hunter like Deinonychus. Alan reassures Tim that he is correct, but also adds that Deinonychus is now considered to be one of the Velociraptors. And factually speaking, there is a basis for that in the scientific community. Now, as stated before, Deinonychus is rarely ever called Velociraptor in today's day and age, but the two animals are indeed raptors in every way true to the classification. I've brought this particular topic up in the past in previous videos, but I thought it would be a good topic to go over specifically to clear the air on what exactly the raptors in this series are. For all intents and purposes, Velociraptor Antirrhopus are the animals talked about in all forms of Jurassic Park media, and both Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg's production went out of their way to make this dinosaur as accurate as possible for its presentation in both mediums. Now, the incredible intelligence of the Jurassic Park raptors has never been documented in the scientific community, and there is no such belief that the creatures were that smart in the real world, and other anomalies such as the Dilophosaurus' venom and frill, as well as the Tyrannosaurus' eyesight, are fabrications made within the Jurassic Park continuity itself. However, Jurassic Park still gets away with this, as well as the lack of feathers on most of the theropods, by explaining how the creatures are brought back, and the hybridization of the DNA in these prehistoric beasts is shown to the audience in the first act of the movie, and early on in the book. That being said, the raptors in Jurassic Park are still not 100% accurate to Deinonychus in some regards, with the animals possessing a slightly larger appearance closer to Utah raptors, and the lack of the aforementioned feathers is a major point of disapproval for some dinosaur fans. Feathers in fact are not entirely absent to this franchise's raptors, however, and I'm not talking about the quills seen in Jurassic Park 3. There actually exists a comic book storyline set on Isla Nublar that features the Velociraptors prominently and also adorns them with fully feathered bodies that we now know the animals did indeed possess. That being said, it is difficult to be exact in any feathered theropod's physical traits due to the animal's feathers usually not surviving the fossilization process. This leaves our interpretation of how many feathers and what they looked like to be generally a guessing game of sorts, and it's one of the reasons I think the film series has kept the dinosaurs scaly instead of feathered in some respects. Now, obviously the main reason they keep the Jurassic Park dinosaurs featherless is because it isn't how the general public experienced these animals when the first few movies were being made, and while reintroducing the franchise after the 14-year break, the filmmakers wanted to make sure the creatures they presented were enjoyable to the viewers as much as possible, and the convenient DNA sequence gaps being filled in the original story was a nice explanation given as to why these creatures are without plumage as of yet. In conclusion, I want to state that the reason I made this video was to explain in full why the argument for the raptors being nothing but fantasy in the movie series is not fully factual. Just as John Ostrom's work on Deinonychus in the 1960s paved the way for the general public's better understanding of dinosaurs, Jurassic Park should also be praised for introducing people to the newly made discoveries on the creatures as well. If not for that first film, barely anyone would know what a raptor was today, and the idea that birds were the descendants of these ancient beings may not have been accepted until much later. I find it incredibly ironic that the Jurassic Park property has been subjugated to much ridicule and disdain by some members of the scientific community, and I think it's important to address every single detail and how specific Crichton addressed the velociraptors he penned in his novels. And leaving out the Antirrhopus discussion and research both Alan Grant and Michael Crichton himself went through to be the framing of a narrative that, in my mind, seems to only serve the purpose of making a good headline, and has to reject the full truth of the real dinosaurs and Crichton's genetically recreated raptors in order to work. And that's the real reason why the velociraptors are the way they are in Jurassic Park.
Spinosaurus was a member of the Spinosauridae family, and it was discovered in Egypt back in 1912. The animal wouldn't be named and described until 3 years later, though, when German paleontologist Ernst Stromer assigned it a new genus and species. These original fossils that were uncovered of Spinosaurus would unfortunately not be around for scientists to study for much longer, because on the fateful night of April 24th of 1944, the British bombing raid on Munich would severely damage the museum in which these bones were housed. And that World War II bombing would destroy the world's first discovered Spinosaur remains. Luckily for us, new Spinosaur fossils had been discovered over the last several years, and this has led to a good bit of research being done on the animal for us to discuss. Now, the most noteworthy attribute of the Spinosaurus has to be the sail on its back for which the animal is named. These tall neural spines that protrude from the creature's vertebrae were uniquely different from the much thinner rods that we've seen in creatures like the Dimetrodon from millions of years past. Some paleontologists have even suggested that they could have acted as the basis for more of a hump instead of a sail when the animal was alive. But most reconstructions of the animal feature the basic spiny sail shape instead of this alleged hump. Now, of course, the crocodilian skull of the Spinosaurus has a lot more in common with other dinosaurs like the Baryonyx and Suchomimus than it does something like, say, a T-Rex. This long, narrow snout was filled with straight, conical teeth that lacked any sort of serrations. The tip of the Spino's mouth was also expanded, and a little crest sat comfortably in front of the dinosaur's eyes. We now know that Spinosaurus used this unique skull structure to assist in eating its favorite food, fish. It should be noted, though, that most scientists believe that the animal did indeed hunt prey on land as well as in bodies of water. The fish-eating theory has led to some speculation about the animal's sail being used to help it swim, although others have suggested that it could have also been used for things like thermoregulation or simply display. Possibly the most controversial discussion that this animal has been in recently is actually the reconstruction of its posture and description in a 2014 research paper. This is when the animal was popularly described as being a quadruped that was poorly adapted for walking predominantly on its hind legs. Much of this assumption was due to the belief that the legs of the dinosaur were far shorter than what was previously known, which ultimately led to the dinosaur's center of mass being relocated. This radical change in the animal's design was met with fierce criticism in the paleontological community, mainly due to the fact that the way in which the researchers found the center of mass to be different was actually by scaling up several different sized individuals' fossils. More recently, in 2018, a new analysis found that the Spino's center of mass was actually closer to the hips than what had recently been speculated, which could allow the Spinosaurus to stand upright and even provide it with decent bipedal locomotion like other theropods. In my honest opinion, this whole debate raging in the paleontological community about Spinosaurus is one of the reasons that I found modern paleontology and how it's presented to the public to be absolutely ridiculous. I'll save any sort of ranting about that for another video, but in short, Spinosaurus is a morphologically interesting and incredibly large spinosaurid theropod with bipedal relatives and ancestors. Its locomotion affinities are controversial, but it had short, stumpy legs, which a team of paleontologists interpreted as being truly semi-aquatic and quadrupedal. But this hypothesis has been pushed back on somewhat in favor of more conservative interpretations where Spinosaurus lacked a true semi-aquatic lifestyle and maintained elements of bipedalism like its smaller relatives. Now, Spinosaurus was factually one of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs that ever lived, with estimates in its size having ranged from 41 feet long all the way to 52 or even 59 feet. The most recent estimations in the animal's weight suggest that it could have come in at around 7.1 to 8.3 short tons. Unfortunately, around 93 million years ago, the animal would fall into extinction. But after extracting what they could, InGen scientists would begin to fill in its genetic code with other sources of DNA and successfully create their very own genetically engineered Spinosaur. Jurassic Park Spinosaurus was illegally cloned on Isla Sorna in 1999. This animal was not on InGen's official list of cloned dinosaurs, and it took part in what is only known as the cryptic amalgam testing that was believed to be early research and development for the second iteration of the Jurassic Park project. Other information surrounding the Spinosaurus creation has suggested that it may in fact have had its genes spliced together with other animals during an attempt that Dr. Wu made in order to replicate feathers in JP dinosaurs. The only individual that we have seen so far in the film series is the creature from Jurassic Park 3. This animal stood over 19 feet tall at the top of its sail and was over 43 feet in length. Its body featured a collection of grays and dull reds, as well as some bluish hues along its back. Its wrists were pronated like many of the other InGen theropods, but due to the fact that the Spinosaurus was made for JP3 in 2001, before many of the new research on the animal was done, it of course does not walk on all fours or even possess the crest that should sit on top of its head. For its time, however, it is relatively similar to what many people thought of the animal back then, except for the heavily criticized power that the dinosaur possessed in its fight with the T-Rex. This remarkable neck endurance and even strength of its own hand grip and bite have added fuel to the hybrid conversations that have been going on with the animal over the last 4 years. And honestly, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that this very well could be the case with the Jurassic Park 3 individual. However, no specific detail has come out directly and labeled it as such just yet. Dilophosaurus is a member of the Dilophosauridae family, and it was discovered in Arizona in 1940. Now, originally, Dilophosaurus was actually misidentified as a megalosaur during these older times. However, once a newer skull was unearthed that showed paleontologists the stark differences between a normal megalosaurus skull and the two crested head of this other dino, it was properly reclassified as a new species, Dilophosaurus, in 1970. Speaking of Dilo skulls, the front of this animal's mouth has a distinct indentation that is recognizable when compared to many other theropod dinosaurs. A clear dip in the maxilla can be seen here that actually continues forward into the premaxilla. This skull is of course what this dinosaur happens to be named after, and that name totally does not disappoint. On top of every Dilo's head, you'll find a pair of long, thin crests, and at the back of the head where these crests end, you'll find a tiny finger-like projection too, making this animal quite beautiful looking in comparison to other theropods of the time. Interestingly, the skull of this predatory dinosaur was rather large when compared to the rest of its body, but for some reason, it was built rather delicate. Dilophosaurus is well known to probably not have had that powerful of a bite, considering the odd shape of the front of its jaws. Some scientists have even suggested that this could mean Dilophosaurus was more of a fish eater than a hunter of other dinosaurs. They say this due to the rosette-like structure of the mouth forming a similar shape to what we'd see later in spinosaurid dinosaurs like Baryonyx and Suchomimus. However, not everyone agrees with this theory as of right now. Other paleontologists believe that Dilos may have used the dips in their mouths to catch smaller prey and pull them to the back of their jaws, where they'd kill them through a series of deep slices. As for the function of their crests, many different ideas have been put forth. Some believe these crests to be representatory of thermoregulation or even sexual dimorphism, with differences in sizes being possible between males and females of the species. Some even believe that this means the crests could have been used to impress new mates. Now, Dilophosaurus could grow to be around 7 meters or 23 feet in length. It was probably averaging in at about 880 pounds or 400 kilograms, making it a pretty slender medium-sized carnivorous dinosaur. Living approximately 196 to 183 million years ago, the Dilophosaurus likely shared its world with other creatures like Ceratosaurus, Scutellosaurus, and Solitosaurus. Jurassic Park's Dilophosaurs were bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In the novels, Dilos were kept on Isla Nublar to be exhibited for Hammond's Park. Here they are depicted as being large 10-foot tall animals with yellow bodies and black spots. The crests on their heads are also a stark red in contrast. It is here where we first learn of these animals possessing the ability to spit a projectile venom that is used to blind their prey. In the following novel, The Lost World, Dilophosaurus is unfortunately never seen, suggesting that the species may have already fallen back into extinction. In the movie canon, the first time we see a Dilophosaurus, it's presented as a small grayish-green creature. Its wrists are pronated, and its skull is shrink-wrapped just like most of the other InGen theropods. Jurassic Park's Dilophosaurus is also without the distinctive dip in the mouth that we've come to expect from it in the fossil record. Both the novel and movie versions possess a soft hooting sound, as well as the completely original ability to produce a toxic venom. However, the film version of Jurassic Park is also given an iconic frill around its neck that rattles in preparation for the inevitable spit that will soon follow. This frill is adorned with a beautiful pattern of reds and yellows that act as a contrast to the rest of its body coloration. Carnotaurus was a member of the Abelosauridae family and was uncovered in a province of Argentina in 1984. While most of what we know of the animal has only been derived from that single skeleton, Carnotaurus is actually one of the most well-understood theropods of the southern hemisphere. Living 70 million years ago in the Cretaceous, this carnivore was in possession of arms tinier than even T-Rex, and it had a pair of large horns adorning its broad head. When living, it's believed that keratin would have encased them like many modern-day birds. This animal is also one of the dinosaurs that we know for a fact was covered in not only scales, but also osteoderms. Many believe these could have been used as protection during combat. Now, Carnotaurus would have grown to around 9 meters in length and weighed in at 1.4 short tons. Standing 10 feet tall, its body was built lightly, and its legs were noticeably long. This gave the creature the necessary equipment it needed to dart forward and chase animals that unfortunately found themselves in front of it. It was a predator that could ambush its prey and strike accordingly to take down the kill. Its snub-faced skull formed a similar look to that of a bulldog, and the bottom jaw was incredibly flexible, allowing it to swallow chunks of food whole like what we see today in modern snakes. Jurassic Park's Carnotaurus were bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In the novel canon, a pair of these creatures were seen on Site B hunting together. Their bodies were in possession of a camouflage ability that helped them to blend into their environments and ambush unsuspecting prey. This camouflage is attributed to their skin having a good amount of chromatophores, just like a wild Velociraptor in the first book and an Ornitholestes in the second. In the movie canon, 2 Carnotaurus were cloned on Site B and left abandoned after Hurricane Clarissa struck the island and destroyed most of InGen's facilities. We never get to see what these animals look like on Isla Sorna. However, we do get to see them on Isla Nublar during the events of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. It's here that we first see InGen's creation in the flesh. These clones are a bit bulkier than their fossilized counterparts, weighing in at 1.5 tons and coming in at over 10 meters in length. Their wrists are pronated, and their faces shrink-wrapped like all of the other clones designed by InGen. And while not in possession of any camouflage ability, they are however shown in 2 distinct variations. The first of which was seen hunting on Nublar and was shown with a reddish-brown coloration with small parts of its body covered in black scales as well. This lone animal chose to capitalize on the fright and Stampede's chaos during the volcanic eruption of Mount Sibo. After picking a fight with a large Xenoceratops, the animal turned its attention to Owen Grady, who was standing close by near a gyrosphere. Unfortunately, this Carno's hunt would soon be put to an abrupt end, when the island's resident T-Rex shoved it to the ground and pinned it down with one of its massive feet. After moving away from the volcano, the Rex pressed all of its weight down upon the small carnivore, breaking its neck and killing it instantly. Once Grady and the dinosaurs begin to flee the incoming blast, you can see the lifeless body of the animal in the background. However, not too long after, we can see at least one different Carnotaurus running away at the edge of the cliff along with all of the other dinosaurs. This brings us to the second Carnotaurus variation seen in Fallen Kingdom. This individual can be seen at the end of the film during the Lockwood Manor scenes. This animal's skin is primarily black, while reddish colors adorn its face and back. It has a deep scar across its muzzle and is shown to have broken off one of its horns in a previous skirmish. Some believe this animal to be Fallen Kingdom's rendition of the Demon Carnotaurus Jurassic Park toy that was released by Kenner in 1994. And this is due to not only its similar color scheme, but also because of small details like its little green eyes. This is the animal that can be seen ripping parts of Eli Mills' body away from the Tyrannosaurus Rex at the end of the film. Mosasaurus was a member of the Mosasauridae family, and its first remains were discovered in St. Petersburg in the 1700s. Back in those old days, several men of science debated on whether the partial skulls that they'd found belonged to a toothed whale or possibly some sort of large crocodile. It took many years for them to figure out that the animal was actually more closely related to the likes of monitor lizards that roam the earth today. And in 1822, William Daniel Conybeare named it Mosasaurus after the Moose River that ran through Mount St. Peter itself. 3 decades after it had been named, German biologist Erwin Schlegel became the first man to suggest that the creature actually had flippers instead of the traditionally assumed lizard-like feet. After newer information and a lot of research that spanned many years, we were able to get an even better understanding of this prehistoric animal from long ago. We now know that Mosasaurus was possibly one of the very last mosasaurid reptiles. Just as Erwin Schlegel had believed, its feet had evolved into large flippers that would have given it the ability to swim adequately in its environment. Even so, we think that the Mosasaurus more than likely preferred to live closer to the ocean's surface, where it would have been able to easily catch its favorite prey. These victims would have included birds, pterosaurs, plesiosaurs, possibly small dinosaurs that got a little too close to the water's edge, as well as ammonites and turtles. Mosasaurus would even prey on smaller mosasaurs that unfortunately swam into the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, the body of the Mosasaurus was pretty hefty in size. They were decently sized predators that came complete with jaws that attached rather tightly to the animal's skull. Their teeth were conical in shape, and their flippers had 5 digits in front and 4 in the back. They also came well equipped with a powerful tail that many scientists believe gave the animals a good source of propulsion. The largest mosasaur specimens that we currently have recorded could grow up to around 17 meters in length. Being 56 feet long, these guys were definitely not to be messed with lightly in the late Cretaceous. Now, many years after the animal terrorized the oceans of history's past, the Mosasaurus would sadly fall into extinction. However, much later, the amazing geneticists who worked for InGen were able to luckily locate and synthesize the DNA of this incredible species. And after some troubleshooting, they were successfully able to recreate their very own breed of Mosasaur. Mosasaurus was first bred after the fall of Jurassic Park. On August 25th of 2000, some InGen scientists happened to be testing a prototype iron analyzer that wound up finding small traces of mosasaur DNA on a newly discovered skeleton. Dr. Henry Wu believed this method to be the only way in which the geneticists would ever be able to extract viable resources from these animals without going into the more traditional method of mining insects that were trapped in amber. After being successfully recreated for exhibition in Jurassic World, Simon Masrani would have a large man-made lagoon begin construction to accommodate the new animal. The large pool of water would have been located near the center of the island and was a prominent part of the iconic Main Street that we'd get to see in the fourth film. Park workers would often feed the giant animal a good dose of great white sharks that were specifically used to bring the animal out in the open for Jurassic World visitors during the Mosasaurus feeding show. Now, the Jurassic World website has the animal listed as being a mere 60 feet long and weighing in at around 5 tons. This is only a few feet longer than the creature that we know of in the fossil record. However, more recent sightings suggest that the creature has grown far bigger than this original estimate. In fact, the same Mosasaurus that we see later in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is believed to have been over 100 feet in length. Some even call this genetic clone Mosasaurus maximus instead of the traditional Hoffmanni because of its freakishly giant size. Some other important differences that are easily identifiable between the real-life animal and InGen's genetic clone are the absence of a tail fluke. Most scientists believe that the real thing had this at the end of its powerful tail. However, the clone lacks one entirely. We also don't think that its back would have included any of the spiked scutes that we see on the clone. All current information leads scientists to believe that the creature's back would have been rather smooth in comparison. Suffice it to say, the Mosasaurus can be compared to other clones that have several key differences between their fossilized counterparts, such as the recently archived theropod Dilophosaurus. Stegosaurus was a member of the Stegosauridae family and was uncovered during the infamous Bone Wars of paleontological history. Named by Othniel Charles Marsh in 1877, Stegosaurus' first skeletal remains were found north of Morrison, Colorado. The animal would have lived in the heart of the Jurassic period amongst other plant-eating giants like Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus. And the Stegosaurus would have had to watch out for threatening theropods that it also shared its environment with, notably Ceratosaurus and, of course, its arch-rival, the savage Allosaurus. Possibly the most well-known attributes to this animal are its spiked tail, as well as the long rows of heavy plates that adorn its back. Now, that spiky tail is actually called a thagomizer, and it would no doubt have been used as a special defense against any bloodthirsty carnivores. As of 2018, our current understanding of Stegosaurus has evolved dramatically to what many scientists thought of the animal back in the 1800s. You see, for several years, many paleontologists would have had the partial remains of many different individual stegosaurs in their research. This would usually result in one reconstructed animal being composed of the body parts of different stegosaurs from varying age groups. So what they thought the animal looked like was radically different from what was real. In the modern age, our stegosaurs have longer necks, longer tails, and shorter hind legs. This updated information on the creature is just another piece of the ever-evolving research that goes into this ancient Jurassic herbivore, with other outdated ideas being of this creature having a second brain in its hips, and an 1880s depiction that was thought to walk on its hind legs. The true Stegosaurus was far closer to something that you've grown accustomed to seeing in many museums and dinosaur documentaries that have popped up in recent years. Jurassic Park's Stegosaurus were first bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In the novels, InGen created a small herd of 4 of these creatures which were shown living on Isla Nublar in Jurassic Park. In the movie canon, the first time we get to see a Stegosaurus is on Site B in the Lost World. Here we can see that InGen Stegosaurs are green, and come with a darker coloration to the plates that run across their back. They're said to grow to be around 19 feet tall at the tip of their plates, and around 40 feet long. They're also considerably bulkier than their fossilized counterpart, weighing in at around 5 tons. Now, it's unknown whether or not the variations of the animal that we see throughout the films is due to any differences in their genetic makeup or possibly sexual dimorphism, but there are subtle changes that have been made between the ones that we see in the wild on Sorna in the Lost World and the ones that we see in captivity in Jurassic World. One example is the relaxed stance of the individuals that are on display in the 4th movie. Here they seem to hold their tails closer to the ground than what we saw in the 2nd film. However, it should be noted that these same dinosaurs are later shown running in Fallen Kingdom, wherein they have their tails elevated in the air in a way that is very similar to what we saw in Site B. Other differences are the presence of visible beaks in the animals on Isla Sorna, as opposed to what we see in these newer dinosaurs. Allosaurus was a member of the Allosauridae family, and its remains were first unearthed in the famous bone wars of the late 19th century. Named by paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh in 1877, Allosaurus is well known to have roamed the vast reaches of the North American Morrison Formation, but Portugal and Tanzania may have also been stomping grounds for this ancient carnivore. Well over 150 million years ago, this animal preyed on various different dinosaur species, but most notably, the well-equipped Stegosaurus from the same time. Tail vertebrae has actually been uncovered by scientists that reveal that one animal in particular showed puncture wounds in its body that fit the mighty Stegosaurus tail spikes. Allosaurus wasn't going into these fights with nothing to defend itself though. Armed with powerful claws on both hands and a set of sharp serrated teeth in its jaws, this animal would deliver one savage blow to its enemies. Possibly, one of Allosaurus' most memorable attributes is its uniquely shaped skull, which comes with a pair of small crest-like horns at the top of its head. A ridge along the back of its skull roof was present for muscle attachment, a trait that is also shared by Tyrannosaurids. Now, this dinosaur would have grown to be around 8.5 meters in length, or 28 feet on average. But some individuals may have grown even bigger, with the largest definitive Allosaurus believed to be 32 feet long and weigh in at around 2.5 short tons. When hunting, the claws of Allosaurus are thought to have been used to hook onto its prey before going in for the kill, sharing its habitat with many large dinosaurs like Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus, and Diplodocus. There were a great many things that could cause harm to this deadly, yet fragile creature in comparison. That's why some scientists believe that this animal hunted in small packs when it needed to take down more formidable prey. However, even if these animals committed to such cooperative tactics, make no mistake, Allosaurus interactions with other members of its species could quickly lead to aggressive encounters, some even resulting in terrible deaths and possibly even cannibalism. Jurassic Park's Allosaurus were discovered to be on InGen's leaked list that was dated for 1993, but their status in the genetics company was actually inactive, meaning that the animal was never officially cloned on Site B or even Isla Nublar before the incident that shut down Jurassic Park in the early 90s. Fragments of its DNA were in possession by InGen, yet the creature wouldn't actually be cloned until the days of John Hammond had long been gone. No, it wasn't until the age of Simon Masrani's Jurassic World that this animal would finally live again. While we get our best look at an auctioned-off juvenile specimen in Fallen Kingdom, InGen's Allosaurus is actually believed to come in at around 12.1 meters in length and possibly stand 3.8 meters tall. The only variation that we are currently aware of is one with a muted blue skin tone. These dinosaurs' crest-like horns come with a reddish pigment as well. Now, as with all of InGen's theropods, these animals are shrink-wrapped and possess odd pronated wrists unlike their fossilized counterparts. The first time we get to see one of InGen's Allosaurs in the flesh happens to be during the eruption of Mount Sibo on Isla Nublar. Here we can see one specimen snap at a wild Gallimimus running by just before it is hit and killed by a piece of volcanic rock that came hurling out of the mountain behind it. Later we learned that a few of these creatures were rounded up by Ken Wheatley's dinosaur extraction unit, and at least one individual managed to escape the Lockwood estate after being released by Maisie towards the film's end. If we take a look at what this Allosaurus looks like all grown up, we can see that the creature looks radically different from its juvenile design. First and foremost, we need to talk about those wrists, which, for the first time in Jurassic Park theropod history, aren't broken. Among some of the other changes that were made to the animal's design, this full-grown Allosaurus comes with a much more anatomically accurate position for its hands to rest. While it may seem like a very minor difference, it actually depicts the animal far more accurately to what had come before. And while the Allosaur also has a bit of shrink wrapping going on with its skull, the eye orbit doesn't appear to be anywhere near as sucked up and crevice-like when you compare it to the juvenile design in Fallen Kingdom. Of course, that doesn't mean that the creature is the most accurate example of the fossil record.
Mr. Hammond, I think we're back in business.
The carcass of a deceased Tyrannosaurid dinosaur known as the Teratophoneus can be seen lying dead at the base of the radio bunker in that movie, and some of the other deleted material seems to imply that originally the animal may have had a much larger role. So before we go any further, I think it's important to let all of you guys know just what exactly a Teratophoneus is. This dinosaur was a carnivorous relative to T-Rex that happened to live around Utah 77 million years ago in the late Cretaceous. Currently, it's known only from an incomplete skull and other pieces of its skeleton. However, Benjamin Lockwood actually has a completed specimen on display in his mansion in Fallen Kingdom, which I found to be rather interesting. Scientists have estimated that the Teratophoneus they uncovered could have grown up to somewhere around 20 feet long and possibly weigh around 1,400 pounds. However, it's also important to note that they don't think it was fully grown when it died. Another interesting bit of information happens to be some theories surrounding the stronger bite force of this animal when compared to something like an Albertosaurus, which is also in the Tyrannosaurida family. That being said, due to what little evidence they have, this shouldn't be taken as matter of fact just yet. So when it came time to make Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, one of the dinosaurs that would be shown to have died on the island in between the 4th and 5th films happens to be this Teratophoneus. And I've talked about this before in the past, but the carcass that they created for the film was meant to sort of show how the animals were suffering on the island in the absence of their human caretakers. You can see the body of this guy during the scene where Owen, Grady, and the others are just about to enter the radio bunker and look for Blue. Now, what I find really interesting about some of this behind-the-scenes material is the fact that if you take a look at some of these photos that feature the team working on the body, you can actually see what appears to be Jaume Jirabeev's Allosaurus concept art that was used for the film. Of course, it also has a few notable differences with that dinosaur when examined a little more closely, but for some strange reason, this concept art looks like it evolved into the Allosaurus that we see later on in the film during the climactic volcanic eruption scene, and we can actually prove this a little bit further because we actually have previs for Fallen Kingdom that shows a very different interaction that was originally going to take place on the island. You see, originally, the idea wasn't to have the Allosaurus roar at the gyrosphere before it gets killed by a volcanic bomb, and instead, the Allo was actually going to try and go after a small baby Triceratops that had gotten away from its herd just before an adult trike would run up on it and kill the carnivore right before it made the kill. This is where an unidentified Teratophoneus-looking animal would have filled in for the scene where Claire looks out at the gyrosphere, where this dinosaur's fate would have been similar to the Allos that we see in the final release. It's important for me to explain to all of you guys just how much stuff radically changed on Fallen Kingdom during all of these intricate set pieces, because apart from the whole Spinosaurus and T-Rex rematch that got retooled into the Carno and Xenoceratops fight, virtually the entire volcanic eruption went through a flurry of changes as well. There's this really awesome article that Industrial Light and Magic put up on Fallen Kingdom's eruption where they explain that, quote, the film was originally scripted to have the heroes racing to escape a lava flow, but the production soon felt that the lava would look unbelievable moving down the hillside at the required 15 to 25 miles per hour. So the decision was made to have some sort of gas cloud, but even here, it was discovered that such volcanic plume would be so hot that Owen and the dinosaurs would immediately die. A pyroclastic blast is oftentimes up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. In the end, the team decided to have a dust and smoke cloud precede the actual gas and lava. If we look back at these previous scenes for the Teratophoneus and Allosaurus interactions, we can see that lots of lava is actually coming out to burn through the island, and what I'd assume would have been the initial idea for the pyroclastic flow was what they were working with at the time before adding that dust cloud. So where does this leave the Teratophoneus? Well, we know that InGen cloned one on Isla Nublar for usage in Jurassic World, but since it was never really shown off to the public in either of these two movies outside of this rotting carcass, it's hard to say what will become of him in the future. Maybe some of these guys survived the eruption of Mount Sibo, and maybe they didn't. Either way, this is just another example of a canon Jurassic Park dinosaur that will sadly join the ranks of animals like Metriacanthosaurus and Stegosaurus due to the fact that we know they existed in the franchise, but we also never got to see them in the flesh. Anyways guys, what are all of your thoughts on this deceased dinosaur? Do you think it would have made for a cool scene in this earlier version of Fallen Kingdom? And do you think they should bring it back and let us all see it in a future installment? Triceratops was a member of the Ceratopsidae family, and the first known remains of the animal were found in Denver, Colorado. Back in 1887, all paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh had to go by was a set of brow horns that were connected to the animal's skull roof. So initially, he thought that it could have been some sort of large Pliocene bison. Much later, the truth about the dinosaur's body type would become known to 19th century scientists, and after a far more intact skull was discovered, the animal would eventually become identified and named Triceratops. Now, obviously, the dinosaur gets its name from the number of horns that we can see on its head. Two large protrusions sit over the top of the eyes, size, and a much smaller nose horn is placed on top of its beak. These horns would of course come in handy whenever it needed to defend itself from the terrifying killers that it shared its world with, most notably the tyrant lizard king itself, Tyrannosaurus Rex. But it wouldn't only be horns that the trikes would be going into battle with. It also came complete with a pretty sturdy frill that was set behind these horns. What's so cool about this particular dinosaur species is that their skulls happen to be among the largest of any land animals ever recorded. While not always the biggest ever, trikes and their respective members of the dinosaur family have some pretty big heads to say the least. The rest of Triceratops was built just as strong as its skull. The animal's short legs came complete with feet that actually moved forward with their fingers pointing out and away from their bodies. This is uncommon in the other four-legged beasts like sauropods, but pretty standard for ceratopsians as a whole. And it's actually common for theropod dinosaurs as well. Now, inside of the Triceratops' mouth, we can get a pretty good understanding of what kinds of plants the animal loved to eat. During the late Cretaceous, the 36 to 40 tooth columns of the dinosaur would be stacked with 3 to 5 teeth per column, depending on its size. So these guys could have anywhere from 400 to even 800 teeth. It should be noted though that only a fraction of these would be used when the animal was eating at any given time. Nevertheless, with the ability to grow this many teeth, Triceratops would be able to eat tons of palms, ferns, and cycads during its reign on planet Earth, and judging by its size, it would probably have to eat a whole lot of them. Some specimens have been recorded as being around 25 to nearly 30 feet in length and a good 9.8 feet tall. They could weigh anywhere from 6 to 12 tons, or approximately 26,000 pounds for the really big guys. Recently, there has been a rather interesting dispute in this dinosaur's relationship with another ceratopsian animal known as the Torosaurus, which some scientists have come forward with saying that they believe this other dinosaur to not be a separate species and actually just be what a Triceratops would look like if it continued to grow. But since that topic is far more complex and not everyone agrees on it, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it right now. Jurassic Park's Triceratops were cloned on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In the novels, it's revealed that this dinosaur is actually the reason that InGen was forced to paint their gas-powered Jeeps with a noticeable diagonal red stripe. For whatever reason, this color was the only thing that discouraged trikes from charging at the staff vehicles. The dinosaurs from the novel are shown to be far more aggressive than their movie counterparts. In fact, they could only be kept in groups of less than 6 because of infighting and dominance disputes that would result if they became too populated. In the book, we're even told that the dinosaurs started to attack and gore each other once the power went out. In the films, we get to see Triceratops across all 5 current movies, its most prominent appearance being in the first film. Here we can see that the base female trikes look very brown in color, but this is actually because the normally gray animatronic that was used was covered with dirt and mud by the JP film crew on set. InGen's clone trikes are about 8.9 meters in length and weigh in at around 10 tons, which is actually pretty consistent for what we know them to possibly have been like in the fossil record. Now, currently, some paleontologists believe that the small nipple-shaped protrusions that can be found on trike skin was possibly in place for feathery bristles that would give some parts of its body a look similar to that of a porcupine. Now, in the first movie, it was actually supposed to be revealed that Triceratops swallowed gastroliths in order to help digest its food. While swallowing these stones, they accidentally ate some of the West Indian lilac berries, and that's what caused them to get sick. This scene was, however, cut out of the movie, but had it been left in, it would have been a pretty big difference when compared to the fossilized counterpart. From my understanding, trikes have never been recorded as having needed to swallow stones for plant digestion. Also, the feet of the InGen clones are noticeably more elephant-like than that of the real-life creature, which had toes that actually pointed out with more noticeable claws. Variations of the animals can be seen in JP3, where a group of them can be seen with a zebra-like color scheme. Tyrannosaurus was a member of the Tyrannosauridae family, and it was discovered by Barnum Brown in the early 1900s. Named by paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn in 1905, T-Rex was well known to have roamed much of North America during its reign on the planet. Over 65 million years ago, Tyrannosaurus would hunt in regions as far north as Canada and roam possibly all the way down to at least New Mexico. However, most of the more notable remains of the animal have been recovered from the famous Hell Creek Formation, which consists of Montana, Wyoming, and North and South Dakota. Animals that shared their ecosystems with Tyrannosaurus at the time were the titanosaurian giants like the Allosaurus, as well as the massive pterosaurs of the sky, Quetzalcoatlus. Other species that also lived during this time were Stygimoloch, Struthiomimus, and Ankylosaurus, but it was the hadrosaurs that would be in the most serious danger of becoming the king of the dinosaurs' next meal. After a tooth was found lodged in the tailbone of an Mosasaurus who was lucky enough to get away, scientists could confirm that predatory behavior was indeed a part of the Tyrannosaur's lifestyle. Being armed with the most powerful bite of any land-living creature on the planet, Tyrannosaurus could deliver a blow that would devastate any creature that would ever come into contact with it. Recent research done by the Smithsonian Channel even claims that the dinosaur had a bite force of 400,000 pounds per square inch. Regardless if this is accurate or not, the Rex did in fact have the benefit of possessing large, powerful bone-crushing teeth that were constantly getting replaced in its skull. The most noteworthy adversary of the Cretaceous tyrant was of course its arch-rival, the mighty Triceratops. And prehistoric battles between these two were bound to have taken place millions of years ago in several fights for survival during that time. Other important things about T-Rex happen to be its uniquely intelligent design. In fact, the Tyrannosaurus happens to be one of the smartest dinosaurs in the fossil record, almost being up there with contemporaries like the Troodon. Tyrannosaurus also had an incredibly advanced visual acuity and sense of smell that helped it survive in the dire conditions in which it lived. Weighing in at a massive 9 tons and reaching lengths of 40 feet, the T-Rex was definitely the apex predator of its time, and its size alone could strike fear into the hearts of many of the other creatures that shared its environment. Jurassic Park's Rexes were first bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In the novels, InGen created both an adult and juvenile specimen that were shown living together in the same enclosure in Jurassic Park. In the second book, we get information on the behavior of a mated pair that begin to defend their nest from intruding humans. In Michael Crichton's novels, the Rexes are shown to have a very dark reddish color and even have a decaying scent about them whenever they're nearby. In the movie canon, the first time we get to see a Tyrannosaurus is during the main road attack scene after the power goes out. Here we can see that InGen's adult female animals are a dull brown, and they're quite aggressive when compared to other dinosaurs that we saw previously in the park. We later see the same individual attack and kill Donald Gennaro, a Gallimimus, and 2 Velociraptors. Now they're said to grow 12 meters in length and only weigh in at about 7 tons, as opposed to the 9 like those in the fossil record. Their wrists are pronated, and their skulls are shrink-wrapped like most of the other clones designed by InGen. In The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, we're shown what the male versions of these creatures look like. Differences between these individuals and the females happen to be their color schemes and facial structures, with the male Rexes having a green skin tone and a much more pronounced skull shape than that of the females. They're also in possession of a larger throat and have even been shown to being covered in facial scars that many believe to be the result of fighting for a mate, which is totally understandable after newer and more recent studies on the InGen Rexes have come out to suggest that these animals may even have mated for life. In the movie canon, these creatures are also said to be in possession of very bad eyesight, to the point in which the Rex will lose you if you don't move. The last time we saw one of these creatures was after the original individual killed Eli Mills and escaped at the Lockwood estate. It later broke into a Californian zoo and roared in the face of the much smaller and outmatched modern lion. Ceratosaurus was a member of the Ceratosauridae family, and it was first described by Othniel Charles Marsh in 1884. Discovered by a farmer named Marshall Parker Felch just 1 year prior, the very first Ceratosaurus remains were found in a very rare condition. The skeleton was almost entirely complete. The animal's skull was relatively large compared to the overall size of the body, and it came with a noticeable nose horn spiking out at the end of its snout. The dinosaur's eyes were also adorned with bony ridges that formed the lacrimal bones, something similar to what we see in animals like the Allosaurus. Now, the bony nose horn of Ceratosaurus has long been speculated to have been used in a variety of different situations, with some scientists such as the aforementioned Othniel Charles Marsh and even Gregory S. Paul believing that it could have been used as a weapon in combat. However, other paleontologists believe that the horn would more than likely have been brightly colored and only used for display purposes. The deep jaws of Ceratosaurus were filled with large serrated teeth, and its short stubby forelimbs came complete with 4 digits. Some believe that the diet of a Ceratosaurus would have been similar to that of most other meat-eating dinosaurs. However, Gary Burr and Robert Backer feel more confident in saying that the dinosaur preyed on more aquatic animals, such as lungfish, crocodiles, and small turtles. They came to this assessment after noticing that many ceratosaur teeth were found in what were once swamps and floodplains in the Mesozoic era. The original Ceratosaurus specimen was described as being somewhere around 17 to 18 feet long, and the dinosaur would have weighed around 1,400 pounds, although newer skeletons are believed to have been far larger, with another specimen being closer to 23 feet in length and weighing over 1,500 pounds. The rough osteoderm-covered carnivore would have shared its environment with other meat eaters like the Torvosaurus and Allosaurus. Due to these animals all sharing the same diet, it's been suggested that they all ruled separate areas of the Jurassic period, which is another idea that helps support the swampy fish-eating theory. It should also be noted that guys like Backer at one point in time specified that the fit legs of this animal would have been ideal for chasing down herbivores on land when it needed to, but it also could have possibly had the ability to switch to a more water-based diet when the seasons changed and it could enter the swampy areas and swim with its long crocodile-like tail. Jurassic Park Ceratosaurus was first bred on Isla Sorna in 1999. This animal, as well as the infamous Spinosaurus, were not on InGen's official list of cloned dinosaurs, and instead they were actually cloned illegally during a period in time where the company had recently shifted hands. Both creatures were a part of the cryptic amalgam testing, which is believed to have been some sort of gene splicing program by the genetics company. Now, InGen's clone Ceratosaurus is said to be around 30 feet long and 12 feet tall, far bigger than their real-life counterparts. As with all of InGen's clone theropods, their skulls are shrink-wrapped, meaning you can see the bony places on their faces when you shouldn't be able to be. Their wrists are also pronated, and they're noticeably bulkier than what actually existed in the fossil record. Herrerasaurus was a member of the Herrerasauridae family, and it was first discovered by Victorino Herrera in the late 1950s. Early on, paleontologists believed this animal to be one of the earliest examples of a carnosaur, but over the last several decades, this classification has come into question by a number of other scientists. Much of the confusion surrounding this dinosaur had to do with so little of its remains being located upon its initial discovery, with only small fragments of its bones to go off of at this time. However, in 1988, a nearly complete skull and skeleton would be located and studied, which would ultimately lead paleontologists to the conclusion that this dinosaur was more than likely a bipedal theropod that did indeed have a carnivorous diet. Herrerasaurus' mouth was equipped with several sharp meat-eating teeth, its slender skull looking far different from many of the other dinosaurs that would evolve specific characteristics in the millions of years to follow. They did actually come complete with a flexible joint in their lower jaws, however, which is believed to have been used to help grasp and hold on to prey in the late Triassic. Interestingly, this animal shares some physical traits that come from a wide variety of different dinosaur types, notably their vertebral centras looking similar to that of the Jurassic predator Allosaurus, and the pubis bones pointing backwards just like a bird's. For a long time, some people even believed that the animal could have been a sauropodomorph due to its odd characteristics. This has led the specifics of the dinosaur to be studied and questioned for several years after its discovery. Usually, it's described as a basal theropod or basal saurischian. Growing to an estimated 20 feet long and weighing in at what we believe to be 770 pounds, Herrerasaurus shared its environment with other creatures like the Eoraptor, Saurosuchus, and Hyperodapedon, and the formation from which it was discovered was once a volcanic floodplain with lots of forest to live in. Roaming the lands of what is now Argentina, Herrerasaurus has the prestige of being labeled one of the earliest known dinosaurs to have ever lived. Jurassic Park's Herrerasaurus were bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. During the events of the first movie, 4 individuals were present on Nublar. However, all of them were found dead during Dr. Wu's cleanup operation in October of 1994. And to add insult to injury, all viable embryos of the animals were said to have been destroyed after the cold storage units had flooded during the sabotage. Luckily, DNA samples were retrieved on Isla Sorna during the evacuation of Site B. However, no known specimens were ever recorded as to having lived on that island at any given point in time. Unlike many of the other dinosaurs that are featured on InGen's list, Herrerasaurus has yet to be shown in the film series, so we can't really know for sure just what it looks like in live action just yet. But we do actually have some soft canon information on the animal from both Jurassic Park the game and Jurassic World Evolution, the former of which shows us that the red-colored creatures shown in 1993 were not yet fully grown individuals, and that they could actually grow grow all the way up to 20 feet long, just like their fossilized counterparts. They do, however, also come with InGen's trademark pronated wrists, which bend down in a way that is very much improbable for the real-life animal. The creatures shown off in Jurassic World Evolution have a similar design to that of the 2011 game. However, they come in a variety of different color schemes that make them stand out from that older version. It's possible that we could actually see this guy make an appearance in the next Jurassic World movie, but until then, we can't really theorize too much on what it will look like in live action until we actually see it. Stygimoloch was a member of the Pachycephalosauridae family and was named by Peter Galton and Hans-Dieter Seuss in 1983. Uncovered in the famous Hell Creek Formation, this dinosaur has a number of specific attributes that differentiate it from other members of the same family. First off, this dinosaur's skull is considerably smaller than that of its relative, Pachycephalosaurus. It also has a large assortment of spikes protruding from the back of its head and the sides of its face that are far larger and more pronounced than that of the other Hell Creek dinosaur. Stygimoloch is also quite smaller than the Pachycephalosaurus, with some scientists speculating that the creature could grow to approximately 10 feet long and 3 feet high, with a weight of around 170 to 200 pounds. Sharing its habitat with other animals like Edmontosaurus, Triceratops, and possibly even the king of the dinosaurs itself, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Stygimoloch and the other members of the Pachycephalosauridae family would have to live in a world of much bigger and more formidable neighbors. Luckily, some scientists have presumed that the famed domed skull these dinosaurs possess to have been used for ramming, which could be very beneficial in fending off deadly predators. It is important to note, however, that other studies have come out in support of different uses for the domed skull as well, with some believing that the creature could have simply used it as a mating display. And this brings us to some of the more recent and interesting studies of the Stygimoloch. For about 10 years now, some paleontologists have supported the idea that both Draco-Rex and Stygimoloch to be younger versions of the much larger Pachycephalosaurus. Their reason for believing this to be so happens to come from research done on the skulls of the animals themselves. Here's a bit of a lecture done by Jack Horner that goes into detail on the different features of the three animal skulls. After cutting into the skulls of both Draco-Rex and Stygimoloch, we can see that the matter inside is incredibly spongy, which means that these animals still have quite a bit of growing to do. Couple this with the evidence that supports Stygimoloch's head spikes to actually be reabsorbing into its skull, and the resulting information that scientists gathered on Pachycephalosaurus skulls to actually not have spongy matter, and you get the hypothesis that states that it's very possible for all three of these dinosaurs to be the same animal in different stages of its life. Currently, this is the modern day thinking of this specific dinosaur, but that's not to say it won't change sometime in the future. Apart from this bit of information, Stygimoloch and its peers have also been hypothesized to actually eat meat in some more recent studies, but the jury is still out on whether or not this is scientific fact just yet. Jurassic World Stygimoloch were bred and housed on Isla Nublar, the island that was also home to the widely popular theme park. Our first look at this new dinosaur was given to us in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Now, these clones are actually relatively similar in size to what scientists believe them to be in the fossil record, weighing in at 91 kilograms and being about 3 meters in length. Like most of InGen's clones, the wrists of this animal are pronated, yet the typical shrink wrapping doesn't appear to be quite as severe as it is with other members of the company's creations. The prehistoric crocodilian known as the Deinosuchus is a creature that has shown up in a lot of weird places in Jurassic Park's history. While never being seen or even referenced in the original Park trilogy, it got its start in the franchise by appearing in video games around the time of The Lost World. And not too much later, it was actually supposed to be sold as a toy before plans fell through. So despite not being in the movies, dedicated fans will have no doubt heard of its existence before. And with the release of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, a ton of new information surrounding the canon of the film franchise was ushered into the lore in a very big way. And while we do tend to focus on viral marketing sites as well as novels for a lot of that sort of stuff, nothing really makes a bigger impact than the films themselves. So it was pretty shocking for a lot of us to learn that InGen had access to, and at one point in time had even used, the DNA of Deinosuchus. During Eli Mills' pitch to Gunnar Eversole at the Lockwood Estate, there exists a small scene where you can actually see what kind of dinosaurs were used to create the Indominus Rex. It's all visible through readouts on their hybrid's hologram, and one of the reptiles that it looks like got blended with all of the other prehistoric DNA was none other than this specific crocodilian from the Cretaceous. For those of you that don't know, as an animal, Deinosuchus was no joke. The largest adults are believed to have reached sizes of around 35 feet in length, and they're believed to have fed on hadrosaurs and other unsuspecting dinosaurs that unluckily ventured too close to their waters. Basically, they were super crocs like their cousins Sarcosuchus and Purosaurus, only this specific species looked far more like what we know crocodilians to look like today instead of those other breeds. So with InGen having access to their DNA, you'd think that we'd be able to see one make an appearance in the films. But unfortunately, this is yet to ever really happen. In fact, the evidence to support the company having actually cloned one in the film canon itself is actually really thin. Sure, they used some of its genetic code to design the Indominus, but that doesn't give us a confirmation on whether or not they cloned an individual itself. That being said, I do have to also point out that originally, there was a scene in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom where Owen Grady was going to walk through the Isla Nublar jungle and pass the skeleton of a certain prehistoric croc in a small creek. While this animal is never directly identified on screen, it's currently the only evidence we have to support the idea that InGen cloned an extinct crocodilian. And since Deinosuchus is the only species that fits that bill, it's entirely possible to put faith in the idea that this is supposed to be that species. In fact, it's kind of the only prehistoric croc we can really theorize about. While some species in the films are hard to see or even get information on, there's usually an excuse as to why we haven't encountered them just yet. Dinosaurs like the Ceratosaurus had all of their DNA destroyed in the sabotage of the original Jurassic Park. Stegosaurus DNA was never completed, and Herrerasaurus didn't really get a cameo, but we still saw it show up in the Telltale story. Deinosuchus is one of the rare instances where we've got some pretty good evidence to suggest that the creature's DNA was synthesized, but there isn't really any dedicated scene to even showing it off. When it comes to something like the Dilophosaurus being absent, it's obvious to us because we've seen it before. We know what it does, what they look like, and how they behave. Edmontosaurus, even though we know it exists, it fell back into extinction. But what do we know about Deinosuchus apart from the fact that it's a part of the franchise? Honestly, not that much. Now obviously, with its DNA not showing up in any sort of list from the 90s, it's safe to say that John Hammond probably had no hand in the creation of this prehistoric reptile. So logically, it means that this guy was probably a product of the Masrani era. So if it was properly bred like that skeleton would imply, it would have been during the time of a fully operational Jurassic World. Unfortunately, even with this sort of speculation being made, I really have no clue on whether or not we'll ever see it in the flesh someday. Whether it be in live action, in a show, or even as an action figure, Deinosuchus truly is one of the most elusive creatures I think I've ever seen in the whole film series. Even things like the Metriacanthosaurus showed up on websites and in new video games. Deinosuchus? Man, there's really just the bare minimum to go by, and even that can get deleted in post. Still, I find this predator to be a really interesting animal. I can't really say for sure if we'll see it someday, but if we do, I hope its appearance is half as good as what it was in the old arcade game for the Lost World. That was truly an awesome experience. Brachiosaurus was a member of the Brachiosauridae family, and it was partially discovered in 1900 by Elmer S. Riggs. Known to have roamed the Great Morrison Formation over 150 million years ago, Brachiosaurus was noted early on as having a distinctively long neck in proportion to its much smaller skull. The image of its long neck standing up in a rather straight position is what's led scientists to name it Brachia, or arm in English. Another odd trait for this old creature was the fact that the nasal openings were placed on top of its head instead of the end of its snout like most other animals. Initially, many believed this to be an adaptation that would have aided in amphibious behavior, but that thought process has changed greatly in the modern day. Being a large sauropod in the late Jurassic, Brachiosaurus had little enemies to worry about back in their day. Sharing the world with carnivores like Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus, nothing was truly big enough to stand a chance against the titanic plant eater. Scientists believe that the sheer visual presence and massive body was enough to steer carnivores away from even attempting an attack. Now, Brachiosaurus had a skull that has essentially been described as an intermediary structure between that of Giraffatitan and Camarasaurus. In fact, at one point in time, the African species Giraffatitan was believed to have been a species of Brachiosaur itself. Notable differences between these few species are quite evident to paleontologists, but one easy way to really get into some simple detail between skulls would be the number of teeth that each animal has. Each maxilla in Brachiosaurus had room for about 14 or 15 teeth, while the smaller Camarasaurus had 8 to 10, and Giraffatitan had around 11. Brachiosaurus also has the distinction of being a sauropod that has considerably longer forelimbs than its hind limbs, giving it a rather tall appearance in comparison to similar animals like Apatosaurus. Weight estimates for these dinosaurs comes in at around 31 to 64 short tons, and they are believed to have grown around 21 meters or 69 feet in length. The animal's diet likely consisted of gingos, conifers, larger cycads, and tree ferns. And being the massive creature that it is, every day Brachiosaurus would need to take in quite a lot of calories to survive. It has even been estimated before in the past that a 40-ton brachie would roughly have to eat about half a ton of food a day for its dietary needs to be met, meaning this dinosaur would spend most of its life grazing rather than doing much else. Jurassic Park's Brachiosaurus were first bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In the movie canon, the first time we would get to see a Brachiosaurus was on Isla Nublar in the original Jurassic Park. Here we can see that InGen's Brachiosaurs are predominantly gray and possess the ability to rear up on their hind legs and even wade in large bodies of shallow water. On Site B, during the events of Jurassic Park 3, we can see some different individuals with a red pattern adorning their heads, while Grant and the Kirbys move down the river and out towards the coast. It's widely accepted that these are the probable males of the dinosaur group. In Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, we're shown more Brachiosaurs that look far more similar to the 93 counterparts from the original park. However, an additional teal coloring on the tops of their heads gives them a distinct new look that could either be attributed to the clone's age or possibly a different breed. They're said to grow to be around 21.5 meters in length and weigh up to 56 tons. Baryonyx was a member of the Spinosauridae family and was uncovered in Surrey, England in 1983. Well known for the excellent condition of its first skeleton, the holotype specimen discovered by fossil collector William J. Walker would become one of the most complete theropod finds in all of the United Kingdom. Unlike many of the other meat-eating dinosaurs, Baryonyx's skull had a long prominent snout not too dissimilar from some gharial crocodilians. On top of its nasal bones, the animal has a small triangular crest which can be used to distinguish it between other spinosaurids in its family. Inside its mouth, Baryonyx had plenty of serrated conical teeth. The largest of these were actually situated in the front of its snout, which probably aided the animal in catching large fish. Another piece of its body could have also come in handy for this hunting behavior as well. You see, Baryonyx is named after the long curved claw that resides on the animal's first finger. When living, it would have been even longer, with keratin lengthening the bone as a sort of sheath. These deadly claws and that long garish snout would give this creature quite the set of nasty weapons in dealing damage to its water-living prey. Fully grown individuals are estimated to be around 25 to 33 feet long and weigh in at about 1.3 to 1.9 short tons. Its body was unique to other members of its family due to the marked constriction of its vertebra, which either belonged to the front of its tail or the sacrum. Living alongside this Cretaceous beast would have been dinosaurs like Hypsilophodon, Neovenator, and Iguanodon, the latter of which we actually have evidence of being a meal for Baryonyx. Jurassic Park's Baryonyx were bred on Isla Sorna by the genetics company. In 1993, 5 individuals were known to be living on Site B. An enclosure on Isla Nublar was actually being prepared to house these dinos once they'd been successfully transported to Jurassic Park. But unfortunately, Dennis Nedry's sabotage ended any further plans to move them into the attraction. However, Simon Masrani was eventually able to hold Baryonyx within his very own theme park, Jurassic World. And it is in this movie's sequel where we finally get to see the dinosaurs in the flesh. The current clones that we've gotten to see are actually just a little bit bigger than their fossilized counterparts, weighing in at about 2 tons and coming in at 9.3 meters in length. Like most of InGen's cloned theropods, their wrists are pronated and their skulls are shrink-wrapped, revealing the indentations of the skull. Now, this cloned version of Baryonyx is very different to its fossilized counterpart in a number of specific ways. First and foremost, its heavy claw isn't anywhere near as big as it is in the fossil record, and its back can be seen covered in large crocodilian-like scutes that we currently have no direct evidence of. In the film, a Baryonyx can be seen moving through a tunnel in order to evade a heavy flow of molten lava that's just begun to pour through the island. Ankylosaurus is a member of the Ankylosauridae family, and it was discovered by Barnum Brown in 1906. Being one of the largest ankylosaurid dinosaurs, Ankies are well known to have been more than capable of defending themselves. Despite being a rather slow-moving quadruped, this dinosaur was covered in osteoderms that acted like armor, and this defensive attribute came complete with an offensive club at the end of its tail. Ankies were so tough that they were actually built for defense and strength all the way down to their skeletal structures. This is easily seen when looking at the bones in the skull, as well as other parts of its body, which all happen to be fused together. This is what gives the creature its strong name. Speaking of the Ankylosaurus skull, the animal's nostrils actually face sideways instead of towards the front like other members of its family. Another interesting fact about its face is that it came to a point with a beak, which had a ton of leaf-shaped teeth inside. Now, the famous tail club of the Ankylosaurus was composed of two large osteoderms, a row of smaller ones in the middle, and the tip of the knob would have had an additional two osteoderms rounding it out. The last 7 tail vertebrae in the creature's body formed what paleontologists call the handle of the club tail. All of them were connected to each other without any cartilage in between. We believe that tendons are what held the tail club and vertebrae together instead, which would have helped strengthen it in combat situations. Cervical vertebrae in the Anky's neck had big neural spines that would increase in height towards the body. Their armor was very flat, and it's actually believed to have been smoother than other members of its family like Euplocephalus. Still, with a body covered in a good amount of tough scutes, the dinosaur was well prepared for surviving in its rather harsh environment. Ankylosaurs are estimated to have grown between 6 and 8 meters in length, and they probably weighed between 4.8 and 8 tons. It lived at the very end of the Cretaceous period around 68 to 66 million years ago, which makes it quite possibly one of the very last non-avian dinosaurs that ever walked the Earth. Being one of the last dinosaurs of the Hell Creek Formation and its surrounding areas, Ankylosaurus would share its environment with animals like Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, and of course, Tyrannosaurus Rex. That being said, fossils of this creature are actually rather hard to find, which leads some scientists to believe that the dinosaur was actually ecologically rare in the areas that we found it. Jurassic Park's Ankylosaurs were illegally bred on Isla Sorna in 1999. Although the animal was indeed included on InGen's list, and it was in fact planned for exhibition in one of John Hammond's Jurassic Parks, it would factually not be cloned and released on the island until after the San Diego incident happened. Now eventually, these laws against genetic engineering were relaxed in 2003, which promptly led to the illegal Ankies being captured and caged for their transportation to Jurassic World. It's important to note that so far, we've seen 2 very distinct breeds of Ankylosaurs in the Jurassic Park franchise. The first variant was shown to be living on Site B in 2001. The bodies of these animals were a dark black and their underbellies were a dull tan. Their faces had a nice red coloration that is noticeably absent in the other variant of the species. The animals seen living on Nublar are far more silver in color, with most of their armor and scales being shown to have a gray color scheme instead. The clones weigh in at around 6 tons, and are shown to grow at around 9.6 meters in length. This is quite longer than their real-life counterparts. Unlike the fossilized version of the animal, the InGen dinosaurs also have tails that aren't nearly as stiff as the creature that they're based on. But apart from that, we don't really know too much about the actual real-life animal, which means for the most part that the most egregious differences between the 2 versions is the longer body and non-stiff tail. Corythosaurus was a member of the Hadrosauridae family and was named by Barnum Brown in 1914. Discovered by Brown in the Red Deer River of Canada 3 years prior, the dinosaur was documented as being not only lucky enough to have most of its skeleton fossilized, but it was also noted as having good skin impressions surviving alongside it, making it quite the important find for early 20th century paleontology. Now, of course, the most noteworthy attribute of the animal has to be its prominent head crest, which is remarkably similar to something that we might see in a bird like the cassowary in the modern day. Most of this crest is made up of the creature's nasals, and its mouth narrows down into a much more subdued design than what one may initially expect. An interesting bit of information concerning the Corythosaurus crests is the popular belief that this head ornamentation would have helped the dinosaurs emit loud and powerful sounds. Like many of their relatives, these animals are thought to have had the ability to produce low-pitched sounds through their nasal passages, giving them unique and possibly even beautiful noises in the prehistoric era. Some paleontologists have even suggested that this may have sounded like a wind or brass instrument, such as the trombone. Corythosaurus are believed to have started growing this impressive crest when they were around half the size of a full-grown adult. They grew to approximately 30 feet long and probably weighed on average a total of 3 to 4 tons. During its time in the Mesozoic, it would have shared the Earth with creatures like the Gorgosaurus, Parasaurolophus, and possibly even Chasmosaurus. The remains are found throughout the upper section of what is known as the Dinosaur Park Formation, and it is here where scientists have learned that these creatures typically coexisted with other giant herbivorous dinosaurs like ceratopsians, ankylosaurids, and of course their fellow hadrosaurs. Jurassic Park's Corythosaurus were bred on Isla Sorna in 1999. They appear proudly on InGen's original list dating back to the early 90s. After the amusement park failed, the company had a good 97% of its genome mapped and ready to be cloned. However, no animals were said to be active and living on the island during the events of the Lost World in 1997. Still, if you're really vigilant, you can see that the Corythosaurus is easily spotted on a sheet of paper that's being held by the InGen vet during the Brachiosaurus scene. 2 years later, after the events of the second movie, a group of covert scientists made their way back to Site B in order to initiate plans for Jurassic Park's second iteration, which would ultimately become Jurassic World. This is where that 97% of DNA was finally put to good use, and why we see a large group of the animals mingling with the Parasaurolophus during Jurassic Park 3. Now, due to the fact that this dinosaur was cloned after Hammond set up Site B as a biological preserve, its creation is deemed both illegal by the United States government, and it is also an event that may have had something to do with the destabilization of Isla Sorna's ecosystems that took place in the 2000s. During the one scene that we get to view them in the whole film series, the dinosaurs are shown to have pale tan underbellies and a very bright yellow back. Black spots and lines adorn their skin, while a big red crest sits on top of their hadrosaurian heads. In the movie, they're said to be about 13 feet tall and around 23 feet long, making them a bit smaller than their real-life counterparts. As far as I can tell, it looks like their wrists are pronated, which is a standard of most of the animals that InGen cloned during their time. Due to the fact that these animals have been featured very rarely in the film series, we really have only one brief canon scene of them all running around in the background as a means to compare them with their fossilized counterparts. So, while I'm sure that more differences can in fact be made, at such a quick glance, they appear to be just rather typical of a Jurassic Park created dinosaur. As far as we know, none of these guys survived the destruction of Isla Nublar in Fallen Kingdom, and it's currently unknown as to what happened to the herds that lived on Isla Sorna, but I wouldn't be surprised if we somehow got to see it pop up again briefly in Jurassic World 3. Now, I'm curious to hear what all of you guys think about this dinosaur. What was your reaction to seeing it briefly in JP3? And do you think it should get a bigger role in the next film? Xenoceratops was a member of the Ceratopsidae family, and it was discovered in 2006 during the Kaiparowitz Basin project. Named by Eric Carl Lund in 2010, the Xenoceratops holotype specimen included fossils such as a nearly completed skull, a few partial dorsal vertebrae, and even skin impressions. Now, two of the most interesting traits that the Xenoceratops have are its big protruding snout and, of course, its long bull-like horns. Paleontologist David Hone has even characterized these brow horns to looking similar to that of modern cattle. Curving in a horizontal fashion instead of pointing straight out like Triceratops, it's not really hard to see why he'd say something like that. Now, the nasal bones of this animal feature internal cavities, which some consider to be pneumatic excavations. What makes this so interesting is the fact that no other ceratopsian is believed to have pneumatic nasals such as this animal. Pair this with the fact that the brow horns of Pseudoceratops make up for about 40% of the skull's length, and you see that the dinosaur was quite weird looking striking to say the least. The bone core length of these brow horns could be up to 457 millimeters, making them the longest of any centrosaurian we currently know of. The skin impressions of Ceratops were found near the left shoulder and revealed a pattern of large hexagonal and triangular scales. The osteoderms found on the edge of the animal's frill are interestingly shaped like low crescents instead of spikes. Currently classified as a basal centrosaurian, Ceratops is believed to have grown to nearly 15 feet in length and weighed in close to 1.7 short tons. Living in the late Cretaceous, it would have shared its environment with predators like Albertosaurus and Teraphophoneus. Other ceratopsians, such as the Utah and Cosmoceratops, may have lived close by, along with herbivores like the Parasaurolophus.
Something's wrong.
Jurassic World's Ceratops is believed to have been bred sometime after Masrani's acquisition of InGen. While not explicitly stated at any given point in the series' history, evidence suggests that it was at one point in time a resident of the island known as Isla Nublar. But after being captured by Ken Wheatley's men, the dinosaur would later find its new home in the wilds of Northern California after escaping from the Lockwood estate. In the Jurassic World short film Battle at Big Rock, we're given our first initial look at the new dinosaur, and it is here where we can see some pretty interesting attributes in the InGen animal. For starters, the animal's feet differ from what is typical of a fossilized ceratopsian, since they are elephant-like in structure instead of protruding forward like the extinct Triceratops. Now, since their only current physical appearance comes without a specific size chart or bright exposure to light, it's hard to say how big and colorful the animals are in Battle at Big Rock. However, I'd say the current best guess would be that they're slightly larger than 15 feet long and adorned with a reddish color in the face, as well as a darker body all around. They do have scales, but we can't really tell if they're hexagonal and triangular in shape like the fossilized counterparts. Interestingly, the male variant of the Ceratops is considerably larger than that of the female, and it also sports much longer and thicker horns as well. This could suggest a functionality that would be useful in duels during courtship that may take place during their mating seasons. Now, the last that we see of the Ceratops is during this battle, and they've managed to migrate a good 20 miles away from their initial site, currently trying to fit into the modern world. The exact standing of what these dinosaurs are hasn't exactly been revealed completely as far as I honestly know. However, what has been said about them is pretty intriguing. All of this stems from an Entertainment Weekly issue that was dedicated to the entire Jurassic Park franchise. Now within that magazine, there lies an image of some of the concept art for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. When you get to the image of Lockwood's estate, you can see this nice little bit of text alongside it. This isn't the Museum of Natural History, but the private collection of Benjamin Lockwood, John Hammond's former InGen partner who has his own fascination with dinosaurs. Not only are there assembled skeletons, but Lockwood has stuffed dinosaurs as well. JA chose a whole series of dinosaurs that you haven't seen in the movies before, or in any of the franchises before, and put them into dioramas and gave them each a little story. So essentially, it's been published that the dinosaurs that Benjamin Lockwood has inside of his mansion aren't actually statues like many people initially believed. They're actually stuffed dinosaurs that InGen created a long time ago. Now, if this is 100% accurate, I find this to be incredibly fascinating and one of the coolest things about Lockwood's character. You see, most of these creatures aren't actually on InGen's official list, and the ones that are on the list are slightly different to what we know them to actually look like. Take for example the dueling Velociraptor and Dilophosaurus display. This dilo is considerably more green than its JP1 counterpart, and the raptor has a really similar appearance to the male variants that we got to see living on Sorna in the Lost World. Albeit this specimen is a little different, but still, it's a pretty interesting coincidence. And apart from those, we're also shown a Draco Rex, which looks pretty similar to the Stygimoloch that we actually get to see run around and cause a lot of trouble later on in the film. And we get a really great look at a medium-sized theropod that's very different from anything we've seen in the past. The Concavinator is a dinosaur that we have absolutely no record of John Hammond or even Simon Masrani cloning at any point in time in the series. Sure, you could say the same with Draco Rex, but the classification between it and the Pachy as well as Stygi is somewhat of a long-going paleontological mess, so it's kind of less interesting. But the Concavinator is different. If Lockwood has one in his own personal possession, stuffed and set up in an elaborate display, does this mean that he and Hammond cloned it way back before 1993? And if so, why wasn't it on the list? Sure, we've seen dinosaurs that were cut from that list before in the past, with well-known examples like the Troodon and Tylosaurus, as well as the illegally cloned Spinosaurus and Ceratosaurus from JP3, but Concavinator hasn't been featured in much of anything canon up until this point. The current theory that's being supported by most of everybody, myself included if this is actually a real thing, is that these animals were probably super early prototypes that barely anyone got to see. Anyways, the Jurassic Park series has always been about, quote, versions of dinosaurs ever since Crichton's first book, so I can see this being something that's actually supported by the filmmakers in the future, again, if this is indeed the case. Other dinosaurs that appear in this museum happen to be 2 juvenile Diplodocus and a flock of little Mononychus. Fun fact, this short-armed dino is actually one of the only InGen creations in the series that has feather-like quills, which makes their inclusion pretty unique. Also, Lockwood's personal gallery comes complete with an animal that many Jurassic fans have wanted to see ever since the release of the original movie, and that's the iconic Permian beast known as the Dimetrodon. And I'm not gonna lie, it looks pretty awesome. Definitely a design that I'd love to see living and breathing at some point down the road. In conclusion, I guess I should really reiterate that from my own personal standpoint, I can't say that I know for a fact that these are indeed prototype specimens from Jurassic Park's past. I have a feeling they really are, but I don't want to lead any of you guys astray just in case this turns out to be something a magazine just published to get some attention. Nevertheless, I do find these statues to be really well designed, and they happen to serve as one of the most memorable areas in the series for me. Suchomimus was a member of the Spinosauridae family and was discovered in the Urlas Formation in 1997. Named by Paul Sereno just 1 year later, Suchomimus was described early on as being an impressive and powerfully built animal with strong arms and a low dorsal sail running along its back. The theropod gets its name from the long narrow skull that sits atop its short neck, which is far more reminiscent of fish-eating crocodiles than your typical giant carnivorous dinosaur. It shares this classification with one of its closest relatives, the Baryonyx. In fact, this dinosaur is so closely related to Baryonyx that some paleontologists have entertained the idea that this predator may well have been just an African version of that English-born animal. Now, Suchomimus' reign in Africa was approximately 125 to 112 million years ago, and its habitat more than likely consisted of tropical temperatures and a good amount of floodplains. Due to the fact that the dinosaur's upper jaw comes complete with a noticeable kink, and the fact that the curved part of the maxilla has the longest teeth in its mouth, scientists suggest that the animal was adapted for hunting its fair share of fish. The giant claws on both of Suchomimus' thumbs are also believed to have been used in fishing behavior as well. The holotype specimen for this dinosaur was around 9.5 to 11 meters long, and it's believed to have weighed anywhere from 2.8 to 5.7 short tons, although paleontologists admit that the initial specimen may not have been fully grown. Interesting differences between the Suchomimus and the other members of the Spinosauridae family like Baryonyx are the animal's unusually long neural spines which extend upwards in its vertebrae. Although these spines are far smaller to something like the considerably larger Spinosaurus, they actually extend further down the back than what is seen in the other African theropod. Taking residence in what is now recognized as Niger, Suchomimus would have lived alongside other animals like pterosaurs, crocodilians, hypodon sharks, and even Tyrannosaurus. Jurassic Park Suchomimus was discovered to be on InGen's leaked list that was dated for 1993, but their status in the genetics company was actually inactive, meaning that the dinosaur was never really cloned on Site B or Isla Nublar before Nedry's infamous sabotage shut down Hammond's dream. In the Jurassic Park universe, Suchomimus was discovered a good while before it was unearthed in our real world, and the genetics company was actually extremely close to finishing up the creature's genome, with 75% of its DNA already mapped and formulated. In 2001, Billy Brennan even states that he believed the culprit that attacked his associate's plane could have been an InGen cloned Sucho. However, this predator would later be recognized as the much larger Spinosaurus aegypticus. While living in captivity during the creature's stay in Jurassic World, these dinosaurs were actually kept together with their close relatives, Baryonyx. Metriacanthosaurus and a good amount of herbivores were also known to have lived inside of the same exhibit. As of now, we've yet to see an on-screen physical appearance of this fish-eating carnivore from the early Cretaceous. However, numerous depictions of the animal in various promotional material from Masrani Global depict this creature as being blue in coloration and possessing a good deal of yellow spots spread all across its body. It's unclear as to whether or not the wrists of the actual clone are pronated, but for now we can expect them to be, seeing as how this is the trend with all of InGen's created carnivores. Whether or not the skull was created with any level of shrink wrapping is also yet to be determined. Xenoceratops was a member of the Ceratopsidae family, and its remains were uncovered in a province in China. Due to the fact that this is one of the only ceratopsian dinosaurs that we currently have information about living in Asia, it's described as being a very important animal to modern paleontology. The only other dinosaur species that may be in that same conversation is the much smaller Tyrannoceratops, which happens to be an animal that scientists can't really agree on right now. Nevertheless, Xenoceratops was a clear ceratopsian. Sporting a small nasal horn and a tall frill at the back of its skull, this dinosaur, like its relatives, was obviously built for defense. And since it may have lived alongside such carnivorous creatures like Zuching tyrannus, it may have needed these attributes when it came under attack. Growing up to 6 meters long and a nice 2 meters tall, this was clearly one of the more medium-sized frillheads from the late Cretaceous. Weighing in at 2 tons, it was smaller than Triceratops and much closer to the size and design of something like Stegosaurus. Possibly, one of the more prominent features of this dinosaur is its incredibly unique skull. A minimum of 10 curved horn-like processes are set along the rear margin of the combined parietals, and 4 additional horn processes can be found on the combined squamosals. This gives the animal a very interesting head that can be easily differentiated from other members of the Ceratopsian family, and makes it one of the most interesting finds out of China. Jurassic World Xenoceratops were bred and housed on Isla Nublar, the island that was also home to the widely popular theme park. Our first look at this new dinosaur was in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. These clones are quite bulkier than their fossilized counterparts, growing over 8 meters in length and weighing in at a solid 3 tons. The skulls of these ceratopsians come complete with large holes in their massive frills. This level of shrink wrapping is far more extreme than what we normally see in many of the theropod species and gives the animal a very unique and distinguishable look. In The Lost World, an entire subplot involving Lewis Dodson stealing dinosaur eggs for biosyn on Isla Sorna was cut out of the film adaptation, and Spielberg's movie never really tried to make that stuff in the final film at all. But here in the book, we can see Dodson and a couple of others successfully steal dinosaur eggs from a herd of Maiasaura before going into the Rex nest for an even bigger prize. It's here where we get our first feathery dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park series, which are notably Tyrannosaurus Rex, animals that we'd already seen before in the last book that didn't have any feathers at all. You see, for some reason, the baby Tyrannosaurs in Lost World are described as something like small cassowary birds. The animals were said to have large eyes, short snouts, be a pale brown color with a noticeable ring of down around their necks. One of the animals was even cowering and pulling its downy neck close to its body. Now, what makes this little detail so interesting in the world of the Jurassic Park series is the fact that it's only the little ones that were said to possess this attribute. They're the only ones that have like this ring of down around their necks. So that's why the question of, well, did they have feathers? Was it back in the books? And what did that look like? Well, this is where it comes from. Now, the recent Folio Society books that were released seem to adapt the adult Tyrannosaurs with the same sort of feathery material on the backs of their heads and necks as well, although I guess it'd be different than just down, but it's hard to tell. I bring this up because at the time, there was kind of this widely accepted fan theory for not the Lost World Jurassic Park movie, but rather the next film, Jurassic Park 3, where a lot of us were under the impression that the reason the raptors looked so different in that movie was because they had begun to evolve.
This is the Site B laboratory.
Now hear me out here. One of the taglines that is still in use for JP3 on Amblin's official website was "something has evolved." Well, there was also lines on posters like "evolve or die" back when the movie came out. The first saying is obviously a play on Lost World's promos that read "something has survived." Now, we don't really have any concrete information in the canon of the Jurassic Park films that would suggest that this is exactly what was going on here, with the more likely and modern acceptance being that the dinosaurs were just different versions versions that InGen bred, but there is a lot of cool speculation to be had over whether or not the animals were reverting back to their more paleontologically accurate selves when being bred in the wild. Like that frog DNA was being bred out of them, and they were more or less complete genomic creatures that you wouldn't get in the actual theme park. I'm not so sure that's what Crichton was implying here with the Lost World book, because he could have just been giving the little Tyrannosaurs some attributes that they would grow out of as they got older. But it's still something really fun to think about, and personally, I think the idea of having a return to Site B or some other island where some of the older generations of dinosaurs had begun to evolve and change more into feathery or bird-like designs with down is a fun one, but I don't even know if I'd welcome that for myself on a personal level. Now I say that because there's just something uniquely cool about the way Industrial Light and Magic and Stan Winston Studios designed those dinosaurs in the first few movies, and the Tyrannosaurs, Dilophosaur, and Raptors in particular have always stuck with me as being incredibly iconic special effects creations, and those creatures don't have any feathers at all in the first couple of films. Of course, there was another feathery dinosaur design that was supposed to debut with the Lost World movie, and that wasn't the Tyrannosaur hatchlings, believe it or not, but rather the Pteranodons that were intended for the end of the film at the time. These animals went by a lot of names during production, with some designs even being of the Geosternbergia, but the unused Stan Winston creatures were these fluffy animatronic puppets that would have been used during a gruesome ending to the film. I did a whole video on that years ago, but yeah, this is just a couple of the examples of old school Jurassic Park material trying to adapt feathers, or at least pycnofiber-like material or down, to their older genetic clones. Of course, it didn't happen, but both the Lost World book and movie had little steps in this direction until Jurassic Park 3 utilized the quilled mohawks on the male raptors in that film. And personally, I've never been a fan of those when compared to the Velociraptors from the second film. Those tiger stripe ones are just, they're uber cool in my opinion. But anyways guys, I wanted to get all of your thoughts on this subject matter. Feathers have become an interesting discussion in relation to the Jurassic Park franchise, but way back in 1995 and 1996 during production of the second movie, they were featured in the series in little bits of dinosaur or pterosaur material that isn't really talked about. Whether or not that'll get adapted into some other form of media, I have no idea, but seeing little tyrannosaurs that look like cassowaries with a lionish mane of down around their necks that they curl into to protect themselves, it's kind of interesting to think about, don't you think?
There's been this sort of inclination to split up dinosaur color schemes and physical traits in only two unique categories. Either the animal is a male or the animal is a female. Depending on what the characteristics and attributes of that dinosaur might be, you put it into one of the two categories. Well, if we go back in time through all of these movies and do just a little bit of detective work, I think it becomes blatantly clear that this doesn't really make sense anymore. In fact, it hasn't made sense or really even been a thing for a long time now. If you've been following some of my more recent videos, you've probably heard me talk about the variations in Pteranodon designs that have popped up in the series over these last 2 decades. And the reason I've done that and really kept bringing it up is because there's a lot that hasn't really been discussed when it comes to this animal and how it fits into the Jurassic Park universe. From the outside looking in, you just see a big winged pterosaur that flies around and does some cool stuff in the movies. But even upon just a very minor inspection at how varied and unique each depiction of the animal has been, a lot of questions start to form in what I'd assume would be a very dedicated fan's mind. The first depiction of the Pteranodon that we ever see on screen in the Jurassic Park series was shown at the very end of The Lost World. These animals have a lot of characteristics and features that are unique to only themselves when you compare and contrast them to what came shortly after. Such attributes would include the very flexible swan-like neck and notable blue coloration on the reptile's body. Also, a clear lack of teeth is plainly visible when watching the Lost World's credits roll. As far as we know, these animals have been free and living on Isla Sorna ever since Site B was evacuated around the time of Hurricane Clarissa's landfall. And since this was, at the time, the only depiction of a Pteranodon on screen, it can be pretty safe to assume that this is the version of the animal that would have been bred for implementation into John Hammond's Jurassic Park. Well, things get a little complicated when you fast forward a few years into Jurassic Park 3, because
This movie establishes a very different backstory and characterization for the animals that has, unfortunately, never been fully explained. You see, the free pteranodons that we saw fly over the herds of stegosaurs at the end of The Lost World are now contrasted with this much different looking group of pterosaurs that have yet to be let out of their cage. The aviary and its machinations in JP3 pretty clearly tell us that these animals have not been living on their own in the wilds of Sorna for the last few years. In fact, the movie makes it very clear that this group of pteranodons have been stuck hunting and fishing in their aviary for quite some time, probably ever since everyone left the island. It's here where we get to see the striking differences between these animals and their more docile counterparts. These pterosaurs come complete with beaks full of teeth. Their color schemes are vastly different from the versions of The Lost World, and their aggression towards humans seem to be at an all-time series high. Since they've been locked up in their aviary for so long, this is one of the many things that really dispels the simple theory that all Jurassic Park dinosaurs can just be segregated into male and female groups. Here we see a clearly different version of the same animal that has quite a lot of unique physical traits and an alibi for being kept separated from their Lost World kin. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, this differentiation has never been explained in the series up to this current point in time. However, it was something that was actually talked about and discussed during the development of JP3.
The pteranodon is one of the things that Hammond's company was doing without telling anybody about it. They were hatching a lot of different dinosaurs that they didn't admit to, and when they moved out, they basically left the cages open and everybody got on the boats and planes and got out of there as quick as they could. So there are a lot of things running around that nobody knows about.
Oh my God.
Joe Johnston's words here suggest that the pteranodons that we see in the third movie aren't really supposed to be taken as the same sort of individuals that we saw in The Lost World. Originally, I do know that there were plans to include dialogue from Alan Grant that these animals were not on InGen's list, but since that doesn't really make any sense and kind of contradicts the previous movie, it was probably for the best that they cut that line out. Nevertheless, Jurassic Park 3 establishes that there is a separate, more toothy and far more monstrous strand of the species living quarantined on the island during the events of the third film. As far as why they were kept locked away and why they were bred so differently from the others, we honestly do not know. Clearly something is going on here that has led to these clones being drastically different from what we saw flying happily around Site B in The Lost World. But when you get down to what the actual goal or even genetic makeup of this animal is in canon, there isn't exactly a concrete answer. Now, I do find it interesting that much later in the film continuity's timeline, we do get to see Masrani's Jurassic World pteranodons, which look far different from either of their earlier predecessors. In fact, these new clones feature the shorter head crest that is paleontologically known to exist in female animals of the same species, and their beaks look far different from what we saw in JP2 and 3 as well. But there isn't really any sort of reason that we've been given as to why these guys look so different from their earlier counterparts. The only acceptable answer that I personally subscribe to is the one that's the most obvious, and that's the fact that you cannot simply differentiate these clones as being a part of either sex. Variations in genetic versions have existed in this franchise ever since Jurassic Park 3. The pteranodon is just the one that's the most easily identifiable in that film. And if we're talking about behind-the-scenes info, let's not forget that both the older Geosternbergia design and a white-colored pycnofiber variant of the Lost World pteranodon almost made it into the second film. Despite neither of these designs being canon, it too is important to talk about. The one truth that I think people should take away from this video, as well as the franchise as a whole, is that we don't really have an answer as to what happened to the pteranodons in the Jurassic Park series. At least not yet anyways. We know that at some point down the line, the pteranodons were most definitely not a blatantly clear species with a collectively unified set of traits. These are different versions of the same animal. They aren't all just specific clones that came out the same by InGen. Genetically speaking, there is something that clearly sets them apart from their brothers and sisters. We just don't know why they were created like this. It's all a mystery at this point. Whether they be earlier versions or failed experiments, that's all fan theories and headcanon stuff, any of which could be true, but there isn't really any evidence to support a clear-cut answer just yet. At this given point in time, the Pteranodons exhibit an obvious case of genetic tampering.
How long has InGen been practicing this pitch?
Since the day we hired you out of the Navy. War is a struggle. Struggle breeds greatness.
Do you hear yourself when you talk?
This is gonna happen. With or without you boys. Progress always wins, man.
Maybe progress should lose for once.
In 2015, Jurassic World introduced audiences to the Indominus Rex, the film series' first official hybrid dinosaur ever before shown in a Jurassic Park movie. And at the time leading up to its release, as well as going forward, the concept of hybrid dinosaurs has been discussed at length when it comes to how this franchise has evolved, with this animal of course being the catalyst for other such creatures like the Indoraptor and Scorpius Rex arriving soon after. But when it comes down to the works of both Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg and their relationships, as well as past endeavors with Jurassic Park, the introduction of the Indominus Rex is much more complex than what I think a lot of people have actually been willing to explore. So in this video, I wanted to do just that, and dedicate a Jurassic Park history and behind-the-scenes examination on how this dinosaur came to be, and why I think the I-Rex is possibly one of the most important animals this franchise has had to date. Now, to start off our conversation on the Indominus, I think it's important to go back to the earliest versions of this incarnation of JP4. When Steven Spielberg finally got the ball rolling on the 4th chapter of the Jurassic Park franchise, everything was pretty much in place and ready to go before the Indominus Rex was even created. Because at the time, film directors like J.A. Bayona, who would later go on to direct the 5th Jurassic Park movie, were in talks with others to direct a script that was already finalized and ready for production. This script involved a new dinosaur antagonist that was not a hybrid with other dinosaurs, but also one that did not exist in the real world, with the producers opting to create a totally fictional animal that they would have named the Allosaurus as the new big bad in the movie. But that all changed when Colin Trevorrow came in to bring Jurassic Park 4 to the big screen. Reworking the Allosaurus into a more sci-fi focused hybrid dinosaur was something that the director felt would be much more faithful to the source material and spirit of Jurassic Park and paleontology, since creating a brand new animal from scratch pretty much throws out the fossilized library of animals to choose from completely, and doesn't really take advantage of what Crichton wrote of in his books when it came to genetic engineering. In fact, in going back to the first book, much of the conversation between Dr. Wu and John Hammond that involved designer dinosaurs made specifically to cater to Park guest needs was adapted for a scene involving Simon Masrani and Dr. Wu, which can be found in the chapter titled Version 4.4 in Jurassic Park. Now, upon release, the Indominus Rex immediately drew comparisons to an abandoned Jurassic Park storyline that was almost made in 1998 called Chaos Effect, which would have been an animated show centered around fusing different dinosaur species together in order to create new hybrids. The show didn't end up getting made, however the toy line in support of it would come out, and it would be one of the last Kenner-produced Jurassic Park entries before Hasbro absorbed the responsibilities pre-JP3. Now, the interesting thing about Chaos Effect is that it actually includes a dinosaur that has some notable similarities to the Indominus Rex as far as description goes. And while many people would like to attribute the I-Rex to being inspired by the much more wacky Ultimasaurus, I think the real answer is actually Jurassic Park's Velociraptor X hybrid. If you ever owned this dinosaur's figure or have known about its inclusion in the Chaos Effect storyline, you may have noticed a big similarity between both it and the Indominus Rex's behavioral descriptions, with the back of the box plainly reading, quote, "Highly intelligent and clever. It usually stalks its prey in packs and has been known to hunt for sport," which is quite similar to the reveal that Owen Grady gives the audience when the dead apatosaurs are shown to being killed for the same reasons in Jurassic World. Now, the idea of a super raptor, so to speak, didn't originate in Chaos Effect, since Steven Spielberg mentioned he had toyed with the idea of a more monstrous raptor in The Lost World before cutting it from the film, but the entire hybrid dinosaur model for future stories does seem seem to originate in these old ideas from the 1990s, but those ideas themselves have a much earlier origin that dates back to some of the ideas discussed in Crichton's work. Now, this can also be attributed to the original Jurassic Park film, because there it's revealed that mixing different animals' DNA with the prehistoric species has given them unforeseen side effects, such as breeding in the first Jurassic Park movie. But this idea goes way deeper and more in depth in Crichton's first book, where he actually details the abilities of some animals to be even more diverse, such as the Tyrannosaurus Rex's eyesight, for example, which was a result of mixing the amphibian DNA, and even the interesting situation of a wild-born velociraptor named Clarence, who possesses the ability to change colors, almost like that of a chameleon. And then, of course, there was the Carnotaurus introduced in the Lost World novel that had chromatophores all over their bodies, giving them camouflaging abilities in the second book. And while this has never necessarily been 100% confirmed to be a result of DNA hybridization, it is a notable difference as to how the animals of Jurassic Park are given chaotic abilities, different to what you'd find in real-world science. However, when it came down to the film series, none of this was ever really touched on until Jurassic World, and even then, none of it was actually done until you got the Indominus Rex, which did pick up its camouflaging ability from the Crichton novel, and also had a lot of other abilities attributed to it from other modern-day animals, such as the ability to sense thermal signatures like snakes. Nowhere in the Lost World or Jurassic Park 3, or even the original Jurassic Park, did anyone ever mention side effects from genetic engineering being relevant in any of the species, and the only time it ever did get brought up was for the uncontrolled breeding specifically. That one plot point was all we got in the first 3 movies, when the book had quite a lot of different abnormalities to talk about. This resulted in many animals having their unique characteristics either stripped away or being explained through other means in the film adaptations, such as the aforementioned Tyrannosaur eyesight being canonically explained via Alan Grant's known paleontology-based research, and wild-born raptor camouflaging getting abandoned completely. Other animals possessed abilities like venom spitting or a narcotic bite that was sort of left up in the air as to how this came to be, since the scientists in the books never really went into detail about this being either an in-universe reality from a paleontological level, or just how the animals were once InGen hybridized them. However, it should be noted that sequels like The Lost World and JP3 opted to only focus on the amphibian DNA mix that led to breeding, and no such exploration of other genetic anomalies ever really came up at all. And that's what I think makes the Indominus Rex so interesting in the context of Jurassic World, because for the first time in the series' history, they could actually explore some of these scientific ideas outside of animals based in the fossil record. And part of me thinks that could be the result of modern paleontology-based communities becoming far more demanding when it comes to representations of the extinct animals that this film series makes stories about. For example, if the camouflaging Carnotaurus from Michael Crichton's novel had been adapted in The Lost World back in 1997, I don't necessarily think anyone would be too bothered, but had it made its appearance in Fallen Kingdom instead of a more animalistic representation that we got in the 2018 movie, well then I think no matter what, criticism would be directed towards the Jurassic Park license as a whole. Whereas with this dinosaur hybridization idea, Jurassic World kind of takes the heat off of the original books and movies by giving it to a genetically engineered monster that serves the purpose of telling an original story. And that story actually played heavily into the ideas of doing something just because you could, despite the fact that you probably shouldn't, which of course was the first time a Jurassic Park movie had tackled that idea from a genetic engineering perspective since the first film. It also served the purpose of adapting a lot of the ideas from Michael Crichton, whether it be the aforementioned version 4.4 chapter, or the camouflaging abilities that the author gave to his dinosaurs in the second book. So the Indominus Rex served as kind of a vehicle that Colin Trevorrow created to really breathe life back into these abandoned ideas from Jurassic Park's past that had been tried a few times before in animated series and toy lines, but never really came to the film series until 2015. This dinosaur in many ways represents the themes and critiques that Jurassic Park gives modern science in a very idealistic way, mixing criticisms of blind ambition, greed, genetic anomalies, and the ethics of progress for the sake of progress in a very visual way. From the osteoderms that cover the animal's body down to the jagged teeth that make up its muzzle, this is in many ways, in my opinion, an encapsulation of many of the brand's ideas and messages brought together in one new creation design that drove the story forward for not only Jurassic Park 4, but also the Jurassic World trilogy as a whole. It also created a new animal that actually made sense in the canon of the Jurassic Park franchise, as opposed to what they were originally going to do by just creating a new paleontologically based species out of thin air without hybridization through their Allosaurus, which, don't get me wrong, the design looks really cool, but I personally think that's not really utilizing the franchise's story points and themes and messages as well as it could be doing. And look, personally, I never liked the idea of them just making up a new dinosaur. I mean, if you're gonna do that, why not use the genetic engineering stuff that's in the books and in the first movie? You don't have to lie to kids and say Allosaurus was dug up in China. I never liked that idea. All in all, the popularity of the Indominus Rex has proved to be an extremely important part of the series going forward, with the animal regularly getting attention and becoming the focus of many Jurassic World discussions that eventually led back to the original Jurassic Park novel. If I had to put an actual assessment to this dinosaur's importance, I would probably say that in the grand scale of the franchise, Jurassic Park's most important dinosaurs would be things like Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and then probably the Indominus Rex when it came to actual story beats, plot progression, thematic messages, and overall focus when it came to how these films have gone about telling stories. Other animals are of course important in their own ways, like Compys, the Mosasaur, and the Spino, but none of these really got a thorough exploration like what the other three I've listed have had before in the series history. The Indominus Rex is an animal that has carved its name into the Jurassic Park brand in a pretty big way, and that's why I think it's one of the most important animals in the series history to date. Towards the end of Jurassic World, Owen, Claire, and the kids make their way into Dr. Wu's lab, where they see many InGen mercenaries packing up embryos for safe transport. It is at this moment in time when Vic Hoskins reveals to them that Henry Wu was actually working for InGen's security division instead of Simon Masrani himself. After Gray correctly states that the creature on a nearby monitor, the Indominus Rex, isn't in fact a real dinosaur, Hoskins agrees with him before stating the following: "Somebody has got to make sure that this company has a future."
Imagine that one, fraction of the size, deadly, intelligent, able to hide from the most advanced military technology. A living weapon unlike anything we've ever seen.
This is where we learn that the Indominus Rex will be retrofitted and redesigned to help secure a future for the company. Masrani seemed to be more interested in guest satisfaction and dinosaur happiness than actual park revenue, so the innovation of Henry Wu was believed by some to be the best way in which the company could expand into the future. Now, of course, after Hoskins' death, the fall of Jurassic World, and the over $800 million in lawsuits that the company faced, these plans would have to be changed in order to fit the dire times at hand. And after being stripped of his credentials and noticeably absent from any congressional hearings that took place after the incident, Henry Wu would make his way to the Lockwood estate in order to secure a future for his work. Eli Mills, the man who was put in charge of managing the wealth of John Hammond's former business partner, decided to take Wu into the fold of the company. Here, in the very same place that the first DNA from fossilized mosquito was extracted, Wu would begin to finalize his smaller Indominus project. A team of mercenaries was sent out to Isla Nublar in order to acquire a DNA sample of the older hybrid. The DNA within her rib bone would give birth to him, and the Indoraptor would soon become the main priority of Eli Mills and Dr. Wu from there on out. The plan was to manufacture more of them to sell on the black market. However, funds would need to be acquired in order to make more, and so Mills would set up an elaborate scheme that sounded beautiful to those that wanted to save the critically endangered animals of Nublar. He'd even tricked Lockwood into believing that he would safely round up as many dinosaurs as he possibly could and transport them to a secret sanctuary island that would be complete with no fences, no cages, and no tourists, just as Mother Nature had intended. However, this was really just an elaborate lie for seed money that they'd acquire once they sold the dinosaurs at an auction. This would be the funds that would build the next generations of Indoraptors. Now, the Indoraptor individual that we see in Fallen Kingdom is actually an incomplete prototype. Even though Hoskins' implementation of dinosaur and human relationship had been successful with Owen and his raptors, this hybrid was much harder to reason with. The animal lacked the specific behavioral traits that Grady's alpha raptor, Blue, happened to possess. In short, Wu says that they'd need to build another and use Blue as a surrogate mother in order to teach it more obedient traits. This would of course be done after they infuse her DNA specifically into a new clone. This problem with the Indoraptor is something that's directly lifted from Michael Crichton's second book, The Lost World, where Sarah Harding witnesses the raptors on Sorna behaving in unreasonably vicious and negligent ways. They often look out for only themselves and attack each other constantly. This is because of the animals lacking a proper nurturing instruction from any parental figures in the dinosaurs' family groups. Because they were just cloned and put onto the island, they didn't have any elder animals to teach them how to act. So instead, they engaged in basic primal instinct, which proved to be cannibalistic and psychosocial. We can see subtle hints at how incomplete the Indoraptor truly is in the final film itself. There are many moments during the finale where the animal's skin twitches and its body begins to shake for apparently no reason. This is further backed up by Wu's constant insistence that they need to make more Indoraptors in the future, and that the one he's produced is only a prototype. Standing at around 10 feet high and coming in over 20 feet long, the Indoraptor is jet black instead of being pale white like its predecessor. It has a noticeable set of quills adorning its head and a large golden stripe running down its scooted back. In the script and in deleted scenes for the final movie, we learn that the animal has somewhat of a sadistic nature when it comes into contact with humans. Originally, there were plans to further flesh out a backstory in which we learned that it was mistreated and abused by its handlers. A scene was even shot where we'd see the hybrid play with a mercenary's skull inside of its cage. This was after it had killed a man who'd gone in to change a light bulb that was on the inside. This is where we were supposed to learn that the Indoraptor required 3 tranq darts to be put to sleep. Later on in the film, the Indoraptor escapes after having 2 darts put into it. Once freed from its cage prison, the animal exhibits behaviors similar to what its predecessor had in Jurassic World. Every human being it comes into contact with is either killed, seriously injured, or chased away. In fact, it is during its chase after Maisie that the dinosaur comes into contact with Blue, who begins to attack the animal while it's in the process of hunting Grady and the girl. Unfortunately, this all leads to the hybrid's downfall once its weaponized programming is used against it. Being an animal that was always designed to obey military commands, it impulsively attacks the laser that's set to an acoustic signal on a mercenary's gun, and falls to its death on top of a fossilized ceratopsian's horns in the Lockwood Museum. During its time outside of the cage, the Indoraptor met no sufficient challenges whatsoever. Much like the Indominus, once it was free, it seemed to be killing its way around the place in order to find out where it fit in the food chain. No motivating factor ever presented itself for the creature to be in any sort of harm, danger, or feel like it needed to flee. That is, until it was too late. In my opinion, this is by far one of the coolest dinosaur designs to come out of the entire series. Since it was destroyed in Fallen Kingdom, and since the DNA to many different dinosaur species has now been shotgunned out into many places, it's probably the last genetically hybridized animal we'll ever see in the feature films. Now before I go, I want to thank everyone that's helped me build my channel over the years. I'd also like to thank every one of you guys who've watched my stuff. You've all been extremely cool to me. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a like and hope that you'll consider subscribing. God bless you all, Christ is King, see you guys in the next video, and as always, take it easy.